I want you to think back to March 2020. I know we don't want to go there, but think about the conversations you were having with your family. How many of you were getting questions from your family members about what was going on, trying to answer questions? I certainly was. It was happening around the dinner table. I remember my in-laws sent a message. They were in India at the time, and they said, we're coming home next week. We don't think it's a good idea to be in India when there's a global pandemic coming. So we'll just pop back for a few months, and then we'll go back in June. And I thought, no, I don't think it'll be over in June. They said, that's okay, don't worry about it. We'll go back in September. And I said, pandemics normally last for 2 to 5 years at least, so I don't think that'll be happening. So think then to June 2020. How many of you had progressed from dinner conversations to posts on Facebook or Twitter threads or providing updates on the daily case numbers? Congratulations, you're a science communicator. My journey with science communication started probably a few years pre-pandemic, and it was actually having kids that started that journey for me. I began to spend more time on social media when I'm breastfeeding at 2 a.m. in the morning and trying desperately to stay awake. And I began to notice that information online was questionable, frustrating, and I was observing that there was a number of different strategies to respond. I started noticing there was a few doctors online with Instagram accounts, and they were talking about, what was best practice. And there were some accounts that were focusing more on call-outs. And so they would spend time calling out misinformation, or they would highlight a particular mummy blogger and say, don't listen to anything that they say. And I thought, I'm not really sure which is the right way to do this. Surely there's some evidence behind what we do. So I thought, look, I'm going to have a go. I'm an educator, I'm a nurse, I haven't seen any nurses online. How about I have a think about how would I apply educational principles that I use in the teaching space, and how might I apply that online? So this all started pre-pandemic. As I'm digging in and looking in at the research, I'm finding actually there's decades worth of science and evidence behind science communication practice. And in Australia, that started with environmental sciences. The more common definition of science communication these days is any sort of digital media, any sort of formats online that contribute to not your vowels, but to awareness, education and enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and understanding of science in general. So that's kind of the broad lens of it. So then the pandemic comes along, and we begin seeing an increasing volume of people online talking about science, some with expertise and some without. So let's talk about misinformation and disinformation. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the definitions. Then we'll look at some of the evidence around why misinformation and disinformation flourishes, and some of the strategies that you can use to combat it. I'm hoping that what you might take away from this session is a little bit of inspiration to think about the influence that you might have in your circles, or for you to read a little bit more about the science that is out there about science communication in general. So when it comes to misinformation, disinformation and fake news, it's helpful to think about misinformation as the proliferation of inaccurate or misleading information, but there's no necessary intent of harm. Disinformation, on the other hand, is often created with malicious intent. So think about political disinformation or weaponising information about individuals that might have a desired impact of causing them harm or disrepute. Fake news is not a term that's referred to in the misinformation and disinformation literature. It's often chosen not to be used because it really just refers to websites that look like news sites. But as we know over the years, the term fake news has been used colloquially, but I don't personally use that term. Misinformation rarely comes with warning labels, although we have seen with Facebook that we now have fact check options. But why is it that people fall for misinformation, or why do they engage with it in some way? It's a complex area, and it can be related to personal beliefs, worldviews. They may have an ideological viewpoint on a particular issue. So vaccination is the perfect example. A lot of people hold views that are ideologically founded. People also trust people that they know. So they'll trust you as their family member, their friend. They'll trust you over the government official member that presents at the press conference. So people want to trust people that they know, and that's part of cognitive biases that we have. The other thing is that we have a preference for black and white information as humans. It's much easier to latch onto something that is certain, and so people will often fall for information that isn't accurate because it sounds certain. The other thing is that the more times something is repeated, the more likely they are to believe it. So again, this comes back to our cognitive biases. The limitations of our brains to be able to process information means that when we read information online, if we've already heard it somewhere else and then we see it again, we are more likely to hold on to that piece of information. So what about the evidence for refuting it? Well, there is quite a lot. There's decades of research around what's the best approach to focus on debunking misinformation or disinformation. This handbook came out in 2020, and it was largely developed for climate science. So there's been quite a lot of research in the world of dis and misinformation when it comes to climate science, political misinformation, and so on. There hasn't been as much with health information, although what has been done in health information largely has focused on vaccine mis and disinformation. In America, there's been a little bit of research that's been focused on water safety. So if you think about fluoride debates and things like that, and we're seeing an increasing amount. I expect that we're going to see quite an uptick in science around health misinformation and how to combat it. But in this handbook, this is by Stefan Lewandowski, who's a psychologist, Australian psychologist, and he co-authored this with about 20 other experts around the world to develop a comprehensive handbook to help people like you and me think about how do we approach misinformation and disinformation in our workplaces and just in our general conversations. So, one approach is pre-bunking. So basically you inoculate somebody for the misinformation or disinformation that they're going to see. So you might use it as a fact sharing, or you might share general scientific principles. And so you can see here on the slide, I've got a couple of examples of at the start of this year, as the vaccine's coming out, let's get ahead of knowing that there is going to be disinformation that's shared in the coming weeks. How can we get in front of that and share information that will then hopefully trigger something in someone's brain that they'll go, hang on, I've already read something about that. So pre-bunking is one of the methods that we can use as health practitioners and as scientists to think about how do we approach it. This next one, which you're going to see some wonderful screen grabs of me, this is more straightforward debunking. So debunking is when you take a piece of information that's been put out there and you refute it. There are many different ways that you can debunk. So one of the strategies I used to use, and I still use, is I would get a screen grab of whatever the piece of content was, I'd pop a green screen behind me, and then I'd break down why the information was inaccurate. And as you can see, some of them have gotten quite a lot of attention. There's some science that shows that if you repeat a myth, it can have a backfire effect. And there's mixed evidence about that. So basically, the backfire effect suggests that if you repeat a myth, somebody will then believe that myth again, or it will confuse the story. the evidence is not clear on whether that actually is an effect, but it has been found in some studies. So one way to approach debunking information is you can either repeat the fact first. You can say, this one in the middle here was all about the COVID swab going in the nose, and it perforated the orbital floor and caused a brain injury. And so how I approached that was I reoriented people to what anatomy is, how it looks, and where the swab goes up the nose. For some, you might take the approach where you identify what the myth is first to give context. You warn that there's a myth coming, so before you tell them of the myth, you let them know that, hey, I'm going to be introducing a myth to you. This is mythical information, don't hold on to it, and then you unpack it from that way. Another approach which has been born out of my social media practice over the last 5 years is I thought, okay, so there's pre-bunking, I can give straight facts, I can use humour, I can do a number of different things. I can debunk, but debunking is exhausting. Debunking is mind-numbing, and it opens you up to a whole host of other issues that sometimes you just want to avoid. So I thought, well, what does a scientist do? A good scientist will break things down piece by piece. We have a systematic way of approaching things and how we read evidence. So what if we taught people how to do that? What if we tried to embed some critical thinking skills into the people that are reading their content online? So I came up with crabs, and the educator in me was very pleased that I came up with such a catchy mnemonic. Gave myself a little pat on the back for that. But basically it was just a way to slow thinking down, to try and help disrupt those cognitive processes, to think about how do I get somebody, when they read a new piece of information, how do I get them to stop and think before they share? And so I came up with crabs as a mnemonic and a way for people to think about, okay, is the person who's sharing this, do they have a conflict of interest? Are they trying to sell something? Are they trying to get elected into the next public office? Are there any references to back the claim? And you can access that full paper at that DOI there, or just Google it and you'll find it. But here's a picture of it in action. So this was in the first kind of 3 to 6 months, and there was all these myths about Bill Gates flying around. And this was shared by a very prominent anti-vaxxer, and I looked at it and I went, that is so easy to debunk with this little framework, because it turned out that this was about the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-1 back in the early 2000s. The middle one was about something unrelated, and you could just break it down piece by piece. And so I then began approaching that on social media with how I approached any misinformation that I saw. I'd say, okay, we'll get out crabs. Start doing some thinking yourself. You don't need me to give you the answers. You can actually find the answers too. So, what about you? You have a role to play in debunking misinformation. You have an important voice to share. People want to hear your opinion. So how do you approach it? Well, number one, know your audience. As we heard, different audiences like different platforms. TikTok is the preferred platform of all Gen Zers, and that is what they're using. So you know how we Google things? They TikTok them. So if they're looking for a restaurant to go to, they search TikTok. They don't go to Google. The other thing that's really interesting is that 90% of all adolescents who have a chronic illness use social media to find information about their treatments online, or they use it to find alternative treatments. So they are actively using social media in a way to inform their health practice and to find other options. Parents, over 70% of them are using Instagram to find health information, and so they're actively seeking information. So it's really important to know what their platform preferences are. It's also really important to know what their worldviews are, and if you're going to approach debunking, to have an insight as to what are their core beliefs, what are the kind of the things that they hold to most dear. If they value eating in a certain way, how can you reaffirm that viewpoint when you're trying to confront mis or disinformation that they're expressing or engaging with? Video is also becoming more king. So it used to be the days of Instagram where you had a curated feed and all the beautiful things. That doesn't matter so much anymore. People want to know behind the scenes. They want to know something that seems authentic, raw. So getting comfortable with different platforms is a really great way to understand how you can address science issues with different mediums. Okay, lost the screen. Point 2 is be you. So as I mentioned earlier, you have something to bring to the table. We don't need 100 Jessicas talking about COVID-19. We need people talking about different issues with different flavours and different interests. You bring something that is unique, that individuals will relate to and will engage with. And so it's really important to not betray your personal, I guess, values as well when it comes to your social media use or how you might approach unpacking mis or disinformation. And finally, consider your well-being. Being online can be a pretty horrible place. It can be very uncomfortable. You might get emails and all sorts of things full of death threats and all of that. It's also, social media is not real life. So it's really important to make sure you create boundaries and to think about whether you have the mental capacity to engage in debunking and addressing those kinds of things, because it does take a toll over time and your mental well-being is important. So I guess to wrap up, I would say there's evidence for how to approach mis and disinformation, and I hope you would pursue looking at some of those resources to see how you might best do that. Your voice is important and you have something unique to bring to the mix. And 3, I hope you have a try. Thank you very much.